Yeah, I'm good. Calling to order the Clive City Council meeting for February 24th, 2022. Would the clerk please call roll?
Mayor Edwards,
Here.
council members Klein,
One moment.
I'm back to him. McCoy,
Here.
Judkins, absent, Weaver.
Here.
And Bell.
Here.
And coming back to Klein.
Councilman Klein, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. I'm here.
Thank you.
Very good. If you'd rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
To the flag of
United
the
States of
United States of America,
to the republic
to the republic for which it
one
stands,
nation,
one
under
nation,
God,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
liberty
liberty
and
and justice
justice for all.
Very good. We have two adjustments to the agenda. Item AE will be pulled for consideration later, and then we will reorder our action items. Item number 2 on the proposed city maximum property tax dollars will become the first item we will discuss. So I'd entertain a motion to approve it.
Move approval.
We have a motion and a second to
Second.
approve the amended agenda. Further discussion? If not, would all those in favor say aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. That is approved. Next item on the agenda is our citizen presentation. This is the opportunity for a citizen to approach the council on an item that is not on the agenda. Do we have anyone in chambers here this evening who would like to approach the council on a matter not on the agenda? Seeing no one, do we have anyone online, Pete?
Thank you, Your Honor. For folks who would like to participate at this point, you can use the reactions emoji icon at the bottom of your video conference screen and raise hand. If you're participating by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand.
And while Pete is checking on that, I'll just remind everyone that we support the pillars of character counts at all times, promoting and modeling the principles of trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, caring, and citizenship. So in conducting our work, we expect everyone will act in a respectful manner consistent with these principles. Do we have anyone, Pete?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. We'll move on to the consent items.
Resolution.
Resolution from Chad. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from David. Further discussion? If not, would the council please vote? And I believe we're taking a voice vote.
Eric, what's your vote?
Aye.
Thank you.
That passes 4-0. So our consent items are approved. With our reordered agenda, the first action item is our public hearing on the proposed city maximum property tax dollars. Did we publish the appropriate public notice?
Yes, Your Honor, that was published in the Des Moines Register on February 9th, 2022.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
As you all recall, in 2020 was the first year that council had to add this extra step in the budget adoption process. As Matthew indicated, we did publish notice on February 9th on the proposed levy. You can see from the notice, it does exceed the 2%, which is allowable valuation growth threshold. This step is required by legislation. It's been posted in the city's website and the social media. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Staff recommends approval.
Thank you. Do we have anyone in the chamber who'd like to address the council on this tax matter? Seeing no one, do we have anyone online, Pete?
One moment. I do not see any hands going up. Your Honor.
I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Move to close the public hearing.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Would the clerk please poll the council?
And Klein, you may voice in your vote.
Aye.
Thank you.
And will the clerk post the vote once it's available? That passes by a vote of 4-0 to close the public hearing. Now we have before us two resolutions.
Where are they? Which one is it, John? Is it
Item number 2.
Okay. Move to resolution approving the fiscal year 2022-23 maximum property tax dollars.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion? If not, would the council please vote?
Aye.
Thank you.
And then would the clerk please post that vote once it's available? That resolution passes by a vote of 4-0.
Move to resolutions, public hearing, fiscal year 2022-23 budget.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? If not, would the council please vote? And would the
Aye.
clerk please post that vote once it becomes available?
Thank you, Eric.
And that resolution also passes by a vote of 4-0. Thank you. Now we'll move to the public hearing on the Rio Valley Area Water Main Replacement Phase 1 project. Brandon. We published the public notice.
Public notice was published in the Des Moines Register on February 9th, 2022.
Thank you, Brandon.
All right, thank you, Mayor. The city received bids on February 15th, 2022. This project consists of water main replacement in the northern half of the Rio Valley area. 4 bids were received, with Crow River Construction being read as the lowest responsible bidder. You have a tabulation of those results included in your packet. The city has not contracted with this contractor in the past. So Crow River Construction provided a list of previous projects and references for us to review. After reaching out to a few references and seeing the projects they have done in Fort Dodge, Adel, Okoboji, and other cities in Iowa, staff is comfortable with moving forward with Crow River as the prime contractor. Additional notification to the project area will be sent once the pre-construction meeting with the contractor has taken place and more information anticipated starting date are known. With that, staff recommends award to Crow River Construction, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Brandon from the council? Yes, Ted.
Matt, you mentioned in your memo that this was our lowest responsible bid. Did we have other bids that we considered irresponsible?
No, I just use kind of the standard state language.
Okay, I just wanted to check on that.
Mhm.
Does this include the road work, or is this just the water main?
This is the water main, but we also included we have to cross the road in various portions, so we include a few roadway improvements.
The 104th Street that we talked about in the past, is this part of that project or no?
We're addressing portions of it with patching, as well as we have to do a lot of work around the intersections, and that's where the pavement's really in the worst condition. So we're redoing the entire intersections with new pavement.
But 104th Street needs a lot more than just intersections, right? So
Is that in phase 1 or phase 2, Brandon?
Both of those, but phase 2 is the southern end of 103. 3 of the first intersections north of Clark Street is in next year's phase.
So some is in this phase, but most of it is in phase 2 that we'll
Yes.
follow up with next year.
Yes, that is correct.
I had a quick question for you as well.
Yeah.
And I'm still relatively new at this, but I was just looking at their bid versus the others. And granted, they're coming from Minnesota, the rest are all Iowa companies. But even just the first line item, I mean, they're less than half of just the soil. Do we even ask that question? How are they coming in with that such a lower?
Yeah, well, that's where it's tough with these bids. Contractors move their money around to different bid items. So overall, they weren't out of line with the other bids that we received. Yes, that bid item was a big difference, but if we, off the top of my head, I'm just kind of scrolling down and trying to see, they're probably higher on some other items compared to other bidders.
Right, because, and I totally get that. And there could be something that, again, they're not from exactly around here. They may have an avenue of approach that the other places aren't aware of. I was just curious about that.
Yeah, so if it was way out of line, we would definitely look into that, but yeah, that's also what makes it difficult for us to come up with an estimate when there's that kind of play around.
Jeff, it's common for contractors to what you call unbalance their bid. They'll look at the item. The total is here. Some of these items are going to be done a little earlier in the project, so they may put a little more money into it, so they get a little bit more upfront. So it's very common for bids to be all over the place, for items not to match up. It's a game we play with contractors. It's very difficult to say a contractor is not qualified or the bid's irresponsible just because of some of that. There was recently a project down at the WRA where there was like a $20,000 or $30,000 manhole that was going to be done early in the project. The contractor put $400,000 on it. I mean, all the other items look great because they were less, but he got his money up front. So it's just a common practice, I guess, to let you know how some of these work. The big thing is to look at the overall and make sure that the bid is in line. I think Brandon's done a good job of that.
Thank you.
Other questions from the council?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes. Michael,
But to David's point, it is a good point. And, I've seen it happen as well as, they get into the soil and now all of a sudden we have change orders, right? And so even though it's part of the bigger bid, it is a good point by David and something to watch, because I don't think I would entertain a change order on the soil part if they come back, later with an issue of the soil or in the dirt work, right? So they need to build it into the entire thing. And just keeping this front of mind if they do come back.
okay, other comments, questions? Anyone here wishing to address the council on the matter from the chamber or online?
Again, folks participating online, you can use the reactions button at the bottom of your video screen to raise your hand. Councilman Klein, you should be able to unmute yourself as well. I do not see any hands going up, Your Honor.
Thank you. With that, I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Move to resolution approving plans and
We
specifications.
need to close the public hearing.
Move to close the public hearing.
We have a motion to close the public hearing. Do we have a second?
A second.
We have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Further discussion? If not, would the council please vote? And would the clerk post that vote once it becomes available?
Councilman Klein,
Aye. Aye.
So vote to close the public hearing passes by a vote of 4-0.
Okay. Now I'll move to resolution approving plans and specifications.
We have a motion and a second to approve the plans and specs. Further discussion? If not, would the council please vote?
Aye.
Thank you.
And would the clerk please post the vote? Plans and specs are approved by a vote of 4-0. Would be a receipt of bids.
Move to receipt of bids.
Second.
We have a motion to receive the bids and a second. Further discussion? If not, would the council please vote?
Aye.
Thank you.
And will the clerk please post that vote? So the receipt of the bids passes by a vote of 4-0.
I'll move to resolution awarding the contract to Crow River Construction.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We do have a motion and a second to approve the contract to the responsible low bidder. Further discussion? If not, would the council please vote?
Aye.
Thank you.
And would the clerk please post that vote? That passes by a vote of 4-0. We'll move on to the next public hearing on GEO loan agreement. Did we publish appropriate public notice?
yes, Your Honor, that was published in the Des Moines Register on February 16th, 2022.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Mayor and council, we've been very busy with working on our borrowing for our capital improvement projects for the year. This action will approve our intent to enter into the loan agreement, and a resolution gives us the authority to do so. Can I answer any questions, or Suzanne is also in attendance? The memo that you have in your packet should include a list of all the capital improvement plan projects seeking this funding in FY 22-23. And there's also a timeline that was included in that for the process.
Very good. Council, do we have questions? Anyone in the chamber or online?
Your Honor, I do not see any hands going up.
Move to close the public hearing.
The motion to close. Is there a second?
Second.
And we have a motion and a second to close. Further discussion? If not, would the council please vote?
Councilmember Klein has dropped off now.
Thank you.
And then would the clerk please post that vote? The motion to close passes by a vote of 3-0.
I'll move to resolution to enter into the GO corporate purpose loan agreement.
We have a second.
Second.
We have a motion, and a second on that resolution. Is there further discussion? If not, would the council please vote? And will the clerk post that vote? The resolution passes by a vote of 3-0. Thank you. Next item is Central Iowa Waterworks. Matt.
Thank you, Your Honor. Tonight, excited to bring this forward to you, and I will share my screen here. Well, Zoom. Many years, almost decade worth of work with a very important next step before you this evening with this resolution for the support for founding of the Central Iowa Waterworks. And both myself and staff members before me, including Dennis Henderson, has been involved in this project. Former Mayor Scott Surcina is here tonight, who's been involved with it for well over a decade in these conversations. And then as well as Ted Corrigan and Amy from Kaler from Des Moines Waterworks. We've been in these discussions for a long time, and excited to bring this forward for your consideration. Up to this point, the three main utility boards that serve a majority of the customers here in the Central Iowa area have already approved the supporting resolution, this founding resolution, as well as the cities of Waukee and Ankeny, and it is before you tonight. Throughout this process, City of Clive has participated in the conversations. The majority of the work here in the last 12 to 16 months has actually been occurring between the micro group of the three utility boards of Des Moines, Urbandale, and West Des Moines. And then we've been engaged here in the last 3 or 4 months with the results of that work. What we have before you included in the packet, and I'll just kind of briefly flip through some slides here that were included in that packet, is some analysis that we've had PFM do on the framework that is proposed in this microgroup report. And I think that's a key comment, that this is just a framework at this point. It isn't a legally binding document. You're not doing a binding resolution, or your consideration of this resolution tonight isn't a binding action. But I think it's an important first step for the City of Clive to indicate its interest and desire to be a part of this regional conversation and entity. And so this, the analysis that was included in the packet here, that I'll briefly go through, really talks about how the transition that would occur with this new model. We call it the phase 4 model. There's been multiple phases of this analysis, and this happens to be phase 4. That really started about a year ago, and then has been basically discussed and negotiated amongst the three larger utility boards over the last year. And it really looks to do a couple different things. How do we spread capital across the region? How do we recognize growth capital versus some communities that might not have as much growth in terms of who's responsible for some of the allocation of new water production capacity that would be brought online? I think that's a key part of this too, is we're really talking about water production. This would not take any control away from the individual entities' rights to set rates, retail rates for our citizens and businesses. It is really about an entity like Clive, as well as the others that have already signed on to this founding resolution, to be at the table for setting the rates for essentially the supply water, the purchase water that we distribute to our customers. Some of the framework items, again, there's a lot of detail here in terms of how there'd be a transition from where we're at today, how max day demand, average daily demand is treated. Essentially what these metrics are showing you, and that's where the summary pages are very key, is there's definitely a benefit to Clive's ratepayers to consider this regional authority, and that's why we're bringing this before you tonight in terms of understanding the benefits of this entity and how operations and maintenance, fixed variable costs are transitioned right now. For example, Des Moines Waterworks bears the full expense of the amount of capacity that we do not use of our purchase capacity. So for example, we have approximately 7 MGD or 7 million gallons per day that are allocated to us for our capacity. Last year, we hit our highest pumpage of about 4.1 million during the drought. So there's an excess capacity there that Des Moines Waterworks is obligated to provide or have available to us. But if we're not necessarily getting close to that number, they're not seeing revenue from that. They're not capturing revenue from that. So there's an imbalance there in terms of the obligation to maintain that capacity. And this is, there's a balancing act of this all the way across the metro area. And so what this regional entity looks to do is how do we better balance that for the long term, not just for Clive, but for all the entities that are involved. So I'm going to jump to the
Matt, before
Yeah.
you move on from that.
Go ahead.
For that capacity, did we not pre-purchase that?
So what we did back in 2008 is we invested in the infrastructure on the capital that needed to be put in place to provide that capacity. What it did not provide for was the annual O&M essentially for that capacity. So the revenue that, for example, Des Moines Waterworks was getting off of the capacity we were using, that was funding that O&M. But if there's a chunk of capacity that we're not using, there's no revenue being gained off of that. So there's a gap there. At least I think I'm sharing that fairly in terms of how that has worked over the years. So what I want to jump to is this graph. So Matt Stoffel with Public Financial Management works with Suzanne. As you've seen and here in a recent council meeting, Suzanne kind of walked through the water cash flow, kind of the status quo of where we're at today. So if we looked at our current cash flow and you projected it out over 40 years, that's the blue line. So in terms of where the per 1,000 gallon rate, at least what of the assumptions that we know today of where that rate would be going. What Matt was able to do, and he's been doing this for some of the other utility boards and clients throughout the metro areas. What does this regional model, we call it phase 4 adjusted, look like? So that's the orange line, and you can see the gap there is really the savings or opportunities, again, based on the assumptions that we know today before all the details are worked out. So as you can see over the long term, there is definitely a benefit from a per 1,000 gallon purchase price for the city of Clive to be a part of this regional entity. And then this next slide here is kind of some of those assumptions that we took into account in terms of where some of the rate increases have been here recently and projected out for the long term. So one key aspect also that was included in the documentation in your packet is this discussion on asset transfer. So going into these, one thing that was important for the city of Clive is we did have that excess purchase capacity that we invested in at a substantial dollar amount back in 2008. And would there be an opportunity for us to get some return, a reasonable return on that investment? Because that capacity essentially would, under a regional entity, would then be transferred to the region and provided. So are we getting some resources back, recognizing that we bought over or bought ahead back in 2008? And what these basically jumping to the last page here is, again, the way the framework is laid out today, a lot of details still to be worked out, is that Des Moines Waterworks would be recognized for the assets that are under their control in this model. That's why you see the high net cash position that they would be receiving from the other entities, and Clive is the other entity that would be also have the potential to receive some return on our excess capacity, our asset that we have and our excess purchase capacity. This is all through an amortizing formula, and you'd see the other entities in red are basically paying off those net assets that you see on the table there. So for us,
How will they amortize that?
so there's You go back. And I might need some help from Ted and Amy on all of the formulas here, but essentially there was a book value associated with the MGD capacity. And that was each MGD had an assigned value, and then that was amortized over time. And so when you have, like for us, what we paid for back in 2008 isn't necessarily the value that it is today. We've had it now for quite a bit of time. And so that was taken into account over that time period. And so that's why our net position is about 1.6 million under this model versus the 8+ million that we funded way back. Actually, it was even more than that back in 2008 for our excess capacity. All the full calculations behind the scenes, I would have to follow up with you on that for some exact information.
Well, I'm just curious, like Ankeny, if I'm reading this right, they're going to owe basically 10 million for the asset transfer.
Mhm.
So, I mean, Ankeny's not going to pay 10 million up front to do this. So how does that work out?
Well, essentially, that is what we're talking about.
Is it?
Now, it doesn't necessarily all have to be at once. That it might be bonded for over time. But they're essentially buying into, for example, Des Moines Waterworks assets that they control. And now having a controlling stake in them as a regional entity, as a part of a regional entity.
Okay.
We happen to have more than we need in excess, and we're a much smaller community, obviously, than Ankeny, and they're continuing to grow and are going to have high growth demands that necessitate some of these numbers. And that's one thing too that I think that's important for us as a community of Clive. We are going to see a built out scenario here in a relatively short time period, 5, 6, 7 years, that the way the framework has been developed, there is an expense that's transferred to the growing communities in terms of a share of that joint capital, that once we're done growing, that we'll be a small part of it, but we won't be as big of a part of it as the fast growing communities are. That was a big key point in the framework and the negotiation. So this is where the framework sits today. I know that Des Moines Waterworks released a draft 28EF agreement yesterday or the day before, Tuesday. I think is when I got the email. That really is the starting point for the conversation of the actual legal binding document that would be worked on over the next 6 months. By September is the planned goal at this point, to actually get to a formal legal arrangement for a regional entity that would hopefully kick off by the first of the year 2023.
And that would outline the governance, like the board of directors, how it's composed, the exec board,
right,
their terms, all of that kind of.
And so it would be based off the framework that you see in the micro report, which kind of lays out the high level governance structure where everybody has a seat at the table, but then we get into the details of how do you do the terms, overlapping terms, who are A terms, B terms, C terms, to make sure you have a rotation. What are the length of the terms?
Right. How
How do cities make that appointment? Because you got utility boards involved, as well as municipalities that control the rate setting in their communities. So that would be all the details that would be worked out in the 20 agreement that is our starting point here this week. So that one that I wanted to mention.
Do all these numbers change though if one of these cities that are named in here under those asset transfers does not participate?
I think if you had one of the larger entities that have already committed to it, were out of the mix, you definitely would see some substantial change in the numbers. And I think that's part of the reason we're before you. We're behind the largest entities in this list, with the 3 utility boards being the biggest, Ankeny and Waukee being the next 2. So with those bigger ones would have definitely made a difference. I think there is still some that are reviewing this and discussing this, Johnston, Norwalk, and some others. So it doesn't necessarily shift. It'll shift a little bit, but it won't necessarily shift to a level that'll make it a disincentive for us to be a part of it, at least based on what I'm seeing today. Does that
Have
answer
any
your?
of these said no thus far that we're looking at here? The Des Moines, Bondurant, Clive, Johnson, Norwalk, that list, Altoona, Ankeny, Grimes. Have any of them said no?
Not that I'm aware of at this point.
Matt, so this is a good macro analysis for the city.
Mhm.
Do we have any micro analysis at the individual resident and business level of what kind of impact this will have on them on a average annual or monthly basis? Other than we believe that there'll be less rate increases?
Increases won't be as fast as
Right.
they would be
I mean,
under our
other than
status
that,
quo scenario.
yeah, do we have any kind of analysis on that?
Not yet, but I would say as we get further along in this process and we're starting to get into the details of an actual 2080 and hard numbers, we would definitely want to bring that back to you and present and show you what some of those scenarios look like and the difference that it can make. We can show it on a percentage, basis of like that graph that you're seeing today at that, again, that macro level. But my hope would be is when we bring this back to you for formal adoption, we'd be able to have that more micro analysis for you.
We did do just a rough draft. PFM did do a rough draft of the cash flow just to see like next year. Yeah, so we do have a rough draft of the water cash flow.
For those listening, could you identify?
Suzanne Gerlach with PFM, thank you. And Matt Stuffle, my colleague, did do an update to the water cash flow, assuming the regional analysis, just to see when we came and discussed this in January, we were showing 3% for the foreseeable future, which would then become 1.25%. So less than half of the rate projections. In the 5-year outlook, I just did a quick calculation at 78 cents per 1,000 gallons for the rate users. That's what that equates in a 5-year period. It'd be 78 cent difference in the rate per 1,000 gallons. So that's helpful. Those are just initial numbers.
So just a dumb question, would the billing then shift to this new entity or would we still manage all of that?
Nothing would change on our side of things. It would be basically, we would be working with the regional entity and they would be obligated to provide water to us. We would still control all of the billing, rate setting, administration, maintenance of our own system on our end. This regional entity is just focused on ensuring that this region has sufficient amount of water production for now and into the future. But the huge difference for us is now we have a seat at the table.
Right.
In terms of influencing and discussing that rate setting and ensuring that we have that sufficient capacity for our own growth and needs of our residents. And also have a decision making too. Of course, we're a peaking community. We have quite a bit of irrigation, and there's going to be, we've already discussed that around this table of things that we may do in the future with tiered irrigation rates, water conservation programs. We'll also be a part of the regional discussion on that as well in terms of how do we maybe serve as a leader or encourage the broader metro area to consider that as a part of an overall regional water production strategy. But with that, I'd also like, and then in summary, the very last slide here really just lays out kind of some of the things that I've been talking about throughout the presentation in terms of at this point from staff's recommendation in this analysis, why it makes sense again to be supportive of this founding resolution. Again, it's a non-binding resolution, but it's an important statement that the city of Clive is interested in being engaged as a founding member of this regional entity. In summary, but I'd be happy to invite, we have representatives here from Des Moines Waterworks, as well as former Mayor Scott Cirksena, who's been involved in these discussions for a long time, to add any additional comments to the discussion if you would like to.
My name is Ted Corrigan. I'm the CEO and General Manager of Des Moines Waterworks. First of all, I want to thank former Mayor Cirksena for his work on this process for a decade or more, as I think someone already said. And beyond that, I just want to share that from a Des Moines Waterworks perspective, we're very interested in 3 things: ensuring that we best manage the available water resources in central Iowa, ensuring that we most equitably distribute the cost, and ensuring that we have a strong, resilient, robust water supply system for the entire Des Moines metro area. We think through cooperation, working together, planning together, we can achieve those 3 goals. For us, that's really what this is about. The exact impact on every community is a little different depending on what you bring to the table, how fast you're going to grow, how much water you use, all of those things. I think Matt and PFM have done a nice job of kind of trying to analyze that specifically for Clive. our interest is ensuring a sound water supply for the community, and we hope that you will join us in building a regional entity that can do that for all of us. So, thank you.
Scott?
Honorable Mayor, council members, Scott Cirksena, 16330 Boston Parkway, Clive, Iowa. Boy, that's fun to say that on the side of the table, isn't it? Well, good evening, and thank you for allowing me to just lend some support to all the great information that's already been shared. Not a whole lot more to add, other than some personal perspective on where we started with this issue in my 18 years in government, right from the beginning. We were having conversations with key stakeholders, in this group, and particularly Amy Kaler being one of them, back in the beginning with the Central Iowa Regional Drinking Water Commission, about how do we just talk about this idea and this concept of regionalizing the water system. Nobody wanted to talk about it. It was a taboo subject. And now here we are all of this time later on the cusp of really doing something special, something game-changing for this region. If it's one thing that Clive has done very, very well, I believe, we've been at the regional table on many, many fronts over the years. And this one is no different. So we have a real opportunity here, not only with your favorable passage on this non-binding resolution tonight, which I think sets the tone for all of our work going forward, but to really be a part of this process. I commend Matt and Jeff and others on this team, but I commend this council and our mayor for making it a priority to be regional in our hearts. And this one's going to take a lot more work. We've got a little bit of time. The 2080 is a thing of beauty. I have seen that. And going to encourage all of you to dive into that once it's made available to you. So thank you. Thank you for your leadership on this. Again, a lot of work to do, but it's going to be a lot of fun, and it will be game changing. And Matt said it, the fact that the city of Clive gets to be at that table means so much. And so numbers are numbers, but being a part of the decision-making process and the governance, I think really adds value and changes things. So thank you for allowing me to make comments and would wholeheartedly support your moving forward this resolution. So thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Good evening.
Any other comments?
I thought for sure he was going to say the one good thing we do is how we select our mayors.
Now, who was that just spoke?
Was that a motion, Councilmember McCoy?
Yes, sir.
Second.
We've got a motion and a second to approve the resolution. Further discussion? Hearing none, would the council please vote? And would the clerk please post that vote once it's available? And that resolution passes by a vote of 3-0. Thank you all. Next item, we have our pool ordinance. Ryan.
Mayor, Council, little shock there. Mayor, Council, thank you for your time. Tonight we have second consideration for the amended swimming pool code update. We have not received any comments or feedback from any residents or business owners. So our recommendation is for approval.
Thank you. Any questions for Ryan? Go for it.
Sorry, John. I'll move that ordinance number 1114, having been considered by the council, be voted on for passage prior to its final adoption.
Do we have a second?
Unbelievable.
Was that a second, Councilmember McCoy?
No.
Too slow.
It was emotion. Yeah, second.
Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate having that. Further discussion? If not, would the council please vote for the second consideration? And then would the clerk please post that vote? And second reading passes by a vote of 3-0. 0. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Next, we have a resolution involving the collective bargaining agreement. Matt.
Thanks, Your Honor. Tonight, excited to bring forward to you a proposed 3-year agreement with the Teamsters Police Union. It represents our police officers here in Clive. Over the last 3 months, we've been negotiating this agreement with the current 5-year agreement set to expire here at the end of June. One thing I wanted to note, some key things in this agreement is this is Clive is really looking to stay competitive and showing our support for our police officers who keep our streets safe every day with a 5% across the board increase each year for the 3 years of this agreement. And also maintaining our health insurance provisions that we have outlined in the current agreement. But we really want to emphasize this is a great investment in our staff and our key public safety employees here with the city of Clive. And the union ratified this agreement last week, and we would recommend your approval, Your Honor.
Questions for Matt? Otherwise, we need a resolution.
I'll move the resolution approving the collective bargaining agreement with the police union.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion? Hearing none, would the council please vote? And would the clerk please post that vote? That passes by a vote of 3-0. Next, we've got 28E. Jim.
Thank you, Mayor. Item for your consideration tonight is the approval of a 28 agreement with the city of Urbandale for some upcoming improvements on Meredith Drive and Alice's Road. This project will be let next month through the DOT. So we'll have those bid results after their March 15th letting. I included an exhibit in the packet showing the overall project limits. In addition to the work on Meredith and at the intersection with Meredith and Alice's, the city of Waukee will be reconstructing a full mile of Alice's Road north of Meredith up to Waterford. Take a quick look at the staging maps. This is a multi-year project, so we'll be out there the next couple of years. The area in blue is shown as proposed 2022 construction. For reference, to the right here is north. So this is Alice's Road. This is Meredith Drive. So that last quarter mile that where we left off 3 years ago on Meredith will be reconstructed to the 5-lane section with 2 lanes in each direction and dedicated left turn lanes. That the blue area is separated into 3 sub-stages. So the first stage will construct that just short of the intersection. Stage 1B would be the intersection itself. The staging notes state that 1A needs to be completed before the intersection is closed. There may be a little bit of overlap, but the intention there is to keep that north-south traffic moving a little bit longer during this first season. 1C then to the north is that first half mile on Meredith, on Alice's in Urbandale. That work can be done concurrently with 1B, the intersection work as well. So at the end of the day, the intersection will be fully signalized there as well, which is needed out there. If you're ever out there, you're probably aware of that. During 1A, 169th Street, access will be closed. They'll be able to move around. 167th and all other accesses to the east to Meredith will remain open. So again, this is proposed 2022 construction. Moving to 2023, again, not as much impact in Clive. Obviously, the gray shaded area is completed the year prior. They'll be moving north and completing, again, kind of in a similar manner, leaving that intersection out as a separate stage, completing about a half mile there to the north in 2A, the intersection in 2B. And not shown here, but then the last piece would be 2C in front of the school there. So that obviously has been separated out because that needs to be constructed while school is not in session. Circling back to the 28E agreement before you tonight, the costs associated with the shared project between Urbandale and Clive, that being 1B and 1A, those have been separated out as a separate division in the project so we can track those costs. and that is what is included in the 28E agreement based on jurisdictional boundaries out there. There are 3 items in the 28E, the design. Snyder and Associates completed the design. There's the estimated construction cost, and then also during construction costs or inspection costs. City of Urbandale is the lead agency on the project. They'll have an on-site inspector out there and be doing the day-to-day operations as far as processing pay requests, et cetera. Those 3 items total $2.8 million, and that breakdown is shown in Exhibit B of the agreement. Again, based on the boundaries, we'll be splitting that cost, the preliminary cost estimate 50-50 between the cities. So right now, that estimated cost for the improvements will be $1.4 million. We'll do a final reconciliation similar to what we did 3 years ago at the end of the project. That tracked pretty closely to 50-50, but if there are any changes, we'll take a look at those and make sure we're on the same page before we make any reimbursements. Urbandale approved this agreement at their meeting earlier this week on Tuesday evening, and be recommending approval tonight. Happy to answer any questions on the project itself or specifics to the agreement.
Questions for Jim?
And I would add, Your Honor, to the geo bonding that we're getting moving forward includes the majority of the funding for this intersection improvement in the rest of Meredith.
I'll move to resolution approving the 2080 with Urbandale.
Second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion? Hearing none, would the council please vote? And will the clerk please post that vote on the 2080? And that passes by a vote of 3-0. Thank you, Jim. Next item is simply a pay request to RDG for Circina Park planning.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion? If not, would the council please vote? And would the clerk please post that vote? And the pay request is approved by a vote of 3-0. Next, we'll move into our Moody's rating scorecard.
Mayor, did we have something we pulled out of consent that we needed to vote on?
No, delayed till next meeting.
Next meeting, okay.
Well, it is a goal of the city council to maintain your AAA bond rating. To understand that process better, Suzanne Gerlach with PFM is here, financial advisor, to present to the city council. Your attachments are in the packet, but your presentation should be here for you.
Okay.
It's helps if I turn it on.
Oh, well, there you go. Turn it on as usual.
There.
Okay.
It's already opened up there, Matt, as a PDF.
Oh. There we go. Thank you. Screen picture.
Is it good one?
Got through a whole lot of.
There we go.
Okay.
Here, I'll zoom in a little bit.
Yeah. I don't want to say it.
Meeting is being recorded.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Plus or minus, you're good to go.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. So each year, the city of Clive seeks a rating from Moody's Investor Service as part of its annual geo bond issuance. Again, I'm Suzanne Gerlach with PFM. Always forget to introduce myself. And so we're going to just go through each portion of the scorecard. We're going to talk about the portions that you can control, the portions you can influence, and the portions that are kind of what they are. So let me see if I can make this work. Page down. Okay. And so we're going to look at there's four primary rating factors that we're going to go through and the sub-factors for each category. Then we're going to have a detailed discussion on what each of those different factors and those sub-factors are, the weighting, how they're calculated. Then we'll look at the other rating considerations, right? Because the scorecard is just the beginning of the rating. It's not the final rating outcome, but that is the where we start with the rating outcome. And then we're going to review Clive's current scorecard and how you stack up for each of those categories. And then we'll just do a summary of the credit strengths and challenges right out of the last Moody's report. So with that, let me see if I can make this just a little bit bigger. Okay, so there are four primary factors in the Moody's scorecard. Factor one is economy and tax base, and that has a 30% weighting, right? So of the four categories, 30% is economy. And within economy, there are three sub-factors. tax base size, which is going to be based on assessed value in Iowa, the full value per capita, which is obviously the valuation divided by your population, and then the wealth of the entity being rated, which is it's calculated as a percent of the median family income. The second factor would be finances. And so that's another 30%. So those two, economy and finances, are over half of the scorecard rating. Finances being 30%, fund balance is a percent of revenues, and then the 5-year dollar change in fund balance is a percent of revenues, and then they do fund balance and cash balance. So it seems a little repetitive, but since Clive reports on a cash basis, usually we see those as the same. So it would be 10% for fund balance and 20% for fund balance and 10% for the 5-year change, right? Subfactor 3 would be management, and that's broken out, that's 20% weighting, and it's broken into just 2 subfactors. Institutional framework, which looks at the laws of the land, that is a 10% weight, and then a 5-year operating history looking at surpluses and deficits. Are you operating on a 5-year average as a surplus or deficits? Subfactor 4 is debt and pensions. And ironically, the debt that you're getting rated is only 10% of your total scorecard, with your pensions being the other 10%. So together, those make the 100% of the scorecard factor.
So before you move on, can I ask a question?
Sure, absolutely.
So on the fund balance and cash balance as a percentage of revenues, do they have a specific target they want us to hit, or is it just the greater the percentage, the better?
We will go through the numbers specifically by rating class for each of these. This is just the snapshot.
Okay.
So we're going to go into each factor, how they're calculated, show you the AAA category, the AA category, the single A for each of those factors. That's what we're doing next. So for economy and tax base, if I can get these kind of sized right. So as you can see, for the tax base size, right, that's just 100% assessed value. They want $12 billion tax base or larger for AAA. Okay, 12 billion to 1.4 billion, kind of a wide range there, a AA category. 1.4 billion to 240 million is an A category rating. And then we have BAA and below, which we're not going to talk about much today. So these are broad classes. As you will recall, there's an AA1, a AA2, a AA3 for each category. So these are just broad strokes. And then you'll line up specifically by each rating class. But these are sort of the big categories of where you're going to fall. So 12 billion or more AAA. Right now, Clive is in the 12 billion to 1.4 billion. For full value per capita, they want 150,000 per person population or more. And so again, Clive, I think falls, I think your falls in the AAA category in this one. So you have very large full value per capita. Median family income, they want 150% of the US or higher. And Clive has one of the largest percentages of any of the clients that I work with in Iowa. So you also fall in the AAA category here. So I don't know if there's any questions about the specific, but these are the 3 and they're each weighted 10%. And when we think about what you can influence and what you can control, economy, you can influence in some ways, but very difficult to control economy in a lot of ways. So I don't know if there's any questions on specifically the economy. Okay. Finances. This is one where I would say, this gives you a lot more direct control. This is your budgeting. This is, all of the kind of things, your fund balance policies, those kind of things. So when we look at, like I said, there's fund balance and then there's cash balance. And since you're on a cash basis, usually they're the same. Not always. There are some unusual instances where they're not. So fund balance as a percent of revenues. They'll talk about as a percent of expenditure in the report, which always confuses me, but the scorecard specifically is a percent of your revenues. So regardless of how much you spend, when you look at your revenues, how much are you keeping in cash? 30% or greater, that was your question, I think, Mr. Weaver. 30% or greater is AAA. So if you have 45%, which is I think where you are, the last scorecard rating was 45%, you're well above the AAA metric for fund balance as a percent of revenues. When we look at 5-year dollar change in fund balance as a percent of revenue, again, that's that 5-year rolling average. So if you have a year that, varies slightly, it's just a 5-year rolling average, and they want 25% for that 5-year average. And 10% for the fund balance, 20% if we look at cash, and then 5% for the 5-year change, and then it'd be 10% for cash. And if you look at them combined, cash and fund balance. So any question on finances? This is one where you have direct input, I would say, and control over your destiny, so to speak here.
And as the council's aware, when we're going through the budgeting process, this is why we talk about cash balance quite a bit, is this table right here, because it is the one that you can control pretty much the most out of anything in the scorecard.
Well, and just to add 2 cents to it, and I know I'm speaking to the choir on this, but as I was reviewing this, it very much looks like how a credit report for a regular person is. And granted, the 5-year rolling average is a lot more generous than what the average person.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, as we do any of our thoughts, we should be using this as a foundational stepping stone, saying, how will that next move affect this rating? So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. That's one of the first things we talk about with staff when we're talking about policy or anything.
And I think to that point, Councilmember Bell too, and I was going to put Suzanne on the spot a little bit at the end here, just to kind of make sure the council can understand too, what's, the basis point difference right now between like a AAA and a AA. Because at the same point, and I know the council's heard this from me before, is there is some of these categories that Suzanne's going through where we are definitely fighting above our weight. The taxable tax base is one of the biggest ones. But I think it's important to understand that when those tough decisions do come at some point, I think in the future, for you to understand of, okay, what is that difference? Because we were, AA, and we'd love to say AAA, but at the same point, I think it's important for us as your staff to also present to you is, if you do drop, here's the impact versus what it may cost you to stay at the AAA level. There's going to need to be a balance there, part of the conversation that we want to introduce to you as well.
And in low interest rate environments, that pricing spread gets compacted. It's not as wide, but when you see the higher interest rates go, the wider those spreads can be. Right now, I would say probably 10 to 15 basis points. It's different for bank qualified year versus a non-bank qualified year. But if traditionally we're bank qualified, it's very unusual to have a non-BQ year for Clive. So traditionally, I would say 10 to 15 basis points. It does depend on the stability of the market we're entering when we're pricing bonds. We're going to be pricing next month. Ukraine-Russia situations providing some stability in the US market. There's a flight to quality happening. We got 8 basis points back today, so I was very excited to see that. But yeah, it's a consideration. And so, historically on average, I would say if I'm looking at a 30-year market average, I would say 25 basis points at the most. And so anyway, I'd say 15 to 25 on average. So, it depends on the transaction. It depends on the PV of 1. That's something that we always calculate when we give you the final numbers, the present value of 1 basis point. So when we're looking at 10 basis points, each deal, it's easy calculation to say, okay, 10 basis points would have cost us X on this transaction. And it's going to be different based on market conditions, based on rates, and based on the average life of the deal that we're bringing to market and all of those things. But I agree that, it has to be a weighted metric. And again, the things you can control, the things you can't control. So
you may want to mention too, the difference between what bank qualified or not. For
yes.
us, last year was the only year, at least since I've been here, where we weren't bank qualified. And that was because we had the last public safety facility bond issue and then the urban renewal bond issue. And so it was the first time we were over 10 million.
Yeah. So currently bank qualified means you issue 10 million or less in a calendar year. There have been certain situations back in 2010 in the recession, they raised it to 30 million. And bank qualified means that when a bank buys your bonds, they can deduct certain costs of carry. And so there are some benefits to banks to buy bank qualified bonds that non-bank qualified underwriters and other investors wouldn't get. And so there are, I would say, probably 2 primary banking networks that we work with in Iowa. UMB Bank is a large syndicate network. They're out of Kansas City, Missouri, and Bankers Bank is out of Madison, Wisconsin. And, they're the other, I would say, large banking network. And so, then all of the other underwriters have bank customers, but it's not quite the same for them if it's a direct bank buy. So, and those are 2 bidders you almost always see on your list. So it does matter. There have been talks, if there was a Build Back Better, they've talked about raising the bank qualified limit. And they've talked about just raising it, period, because 10 million is really limiting in today's environment. But right now it's 10 million per year.
So we anticipate, at least in our current CIP planning, that at least over the next 5 years, we would be under that threshold at this moment.
And to be
bank qualified for our issuances.
Yeah. And if you think about what we just looked at, right, you think just theoretically, right, if you're over 12 billion, how often are you going to be bank qualified? It's pretty unusual to have a AAA bank qualified credit. And so it is pretty special when we have those years and we do get to enter the market. It's why we just get so many bidders usually. It's pretty unusual to have such a highly rated entity to be bank qualified because usually it's the larger entities, 12 billion plus. Those are larger entities that have that AAA rating and just, you know, they're not usually bank qualified. So, okay, any other good questions? So feel free to chime in if there's anything else as we're going through. So management is the third factor, 20% weight, 10% is based on institutional framework, and institutional framework is based on the laws of the land, so to speak. So in Iowa, for a city, right, you're a city in Iowa, how restricted are the laws when it comes to debt service levy, when it comes to levy limits? Schools are limited, cities are not for a tax levy rate, right? So cities in Iowa are all considered AAA. So you get a very strong rating automatically for being a city in Iowa. Schools are a AA because they have levy limits, right? 405 limit for a school with a vote, 270 without the vote. So it's different institutional framework based on what type of municipal entity you are. And then the other 10% for management is your operating history, your 5-year average of operating revenues of expenditures. This is your, are you trending in a deficit? Or are you trending on a surplus for your 5-year average? It's not unusual if you have large cash balances to spend down in some years, right? That's perfectly acceptable to spend some, if you have 45% fund balance, to spend some cash, and you do have policy to spend some excess cash for your flood prone, I can't say that, it's tongue twister for me, flood prone buyout program. Whew, got it. So, you know, that is a policy, and that it makes perfect sense. We don't need 50% fund balance or 60% fund balance. So there are times, and so that's why it's a 5-year average. But again, looking for those operational, you know, structural imbalances that may be from operating at a deficit. And currently, let's see, so Clive is AAA for the institutional framework, and your current 5-year average in the last, we're getting ready to do our credit report this next month. So we'll have a new scorecard based on the 21 audit, but last year's you were at 1.0 times. So right on the A, right in the middle of the A. So you were flat, your 5-year average was flat. So, which makes sense. You have excess cash, you spend it the next year. You have excess cash, you spend it the next year. That's sort of your policy. So any questions on management? Okay.
One thing to note too, it was in the GO bond schedule that March 7th will be our next rating call with Moody's for this next bond issuance. And then we will see if we're keeping that AAA.
Which I fully intend to put forth, put the best foot forward for you. I don't see anything that makes me think you won't, but. Okay, so debt and pensions is the last of the 4 factors, right? And this is the 20%. Net direct debt per full value is 5%, and net direct debt per operating revenues, right? So your direct debt divided by your assessed value, and net direct debt divided by your overall operating revenues. Now, one thing I think I skipped over, when we talk about fund balances and revenues, Moody's does include not just general fund, they'll include your operating funds. And depending on what kind of debt you have, depending on which analyst you have, it's a different definition of what operating funds are. It's one of the first things I check when we get the scorecard. It's your general fund, it's your debt service fund, it's your employee benefits, or what do we call the benefits fund. And it can be the road use tax fund. It depends on if you are using that to abate a bond, or sometimes they just include it. When we talk about operating revenues, it's all of the operating revenues, not necessarily just specifically the general fund. I can't get them to include TIF. I argue with that. I've argued and argued and argued. And like, that is literally like, because they don't include the TIF revenues, but they'll include the debt paid by TIF. And so I haven't won that argument yet, but I'm trying. 12 years and trying. And again, this is where we have, and then we have the 3-year average for the Moody's adjusted pension liability. And that's a little bit of a black box. PFM has its internal calculation. It never exactly ties, but they use the Citibank. They don't like the way that IPERS values values their fund and their investments. So anyway, they have their own PV rate they use, and they basically they say IPERS and municipal fire and police is modestly underfunded. So they generally give them an A rating, but in your last scorecard, as a percent of full value, you were a AA for IPERS and the municipal fire and police, and 1.3 times for operating revenues, which puts you in the A category. And it was the same for both the direct debt and for the pension and liability. Was AA for the as a percent of full value, and it was an A category for the percent of operating revenues.
This
So,
is something we have virtually no control over.
No.
Right? So I mean, like 20% of the whole grade, we have no control over.
Of the direct debt you do.
direct debt,
The
yeah.
pensions we don't. So
Mhm.
since the state of Iowa controls the two pension
Mm-hmm.
systems by state code and then those
Mhm.
boards setting the policies, those last two we have no control over. We just have to report them and report that liability. But the direct debt of operating
Yeah.
revenues and full value, you
So
definitely
10%.
you
Yeah,
definitely do
10%,
have,
exactly.
control over that. But I think what's important to note with what Suzanne just said is in a lot of these categories, we're below AAA
Mhm,
in terms of the actual hard numbers.
mhm.
But because of the weight of some of these other ones that are definitely in the AAA, we get a AAA, which is still, just for me and my experience, it is amazing that we are
Yeah.
at the size of our community.
So, yeah, it was an exciting day when we got that call. I do remember it was an exciting day. So that's just the scorecard, but there are these things called notching factors, right? Because how do we get to the final rating outcome? If that is just the pieces and parts of the scorecard, that doesn't equal your actual rating. And just to cut to the chase on the next slide, your scorecard says you're a AA2. The scorecard does not say you're a AAA. So when we look at all those categories, run the numbers before we talk about any notching factors, you're a AA2. And so these notching factors are very important. And every rating agency, well, Moody's and Standard & Poor's are the two primary ones we use in Iowa. We don't use Fitch as often. Moody's allows for unlimited notching factors, but you can only move a rating 2 notches from the scorecard. So as a AA2 in the scorecard, you can only max out at a AAA, and you can only drop 2 below if you had negative notching factors, because notching factors go both up and down, and it can be so notching factors, I gave you some examples, right? So institutional presence is a notching factor. So for the city of Ames, they have the Iowa State University. For Iowa City, they have the University of Iowa. I'm trying to think of large industrial presence. Those are the 2 biggest examples that literally get a notch just for having a university in their town. Drake doesn't count for Des Moines. It's a large institutional presence. The larger taxpayer concentration. So when we look at your top 10 taxpayers, what percent of the top 10 taxpayers is your total valuation, right? So if you have a high concentration, so as an example, if you're a Bondurant and you have an Amazon and then you have everybody else, right? There's a very high concentration when they get to full value. And that can be construed as a negative until you start to get some other value there, until you get value, until your whole tax base grows enough to sort of offset that. And so it can go, like I said, up or down. How fast is your debt amortized? Do you do 10-year payback? Do you do 5-year payback? Do you do 20-year bonds every single time? The shorter the average life and the faster you repay that principal, it can be a notching factor. As a general rule, we do 10-year bonds in Clive. When we have the larger projects, the public safety facility, we did 20-year bonds, right? Because we're building a new building. And so that matters in the scorecard. Those are notching factors. Financial policies, when we're talking about the management portion, that's a notching factor. When you have defined financial policies that say, I have a minimum fund balance target for my general fund. I have given myself metrics and targets that I'm setting as a goal, and we're communicating publicly and we're committed to upholding. That's a notching factor. And I will say that S&P gives you a little bit more generous of a notch than Moody's does, but it still matters, and those things matters. And those are some of the things that we've done that we can control, right? Because when you put those things in writing, if we can get that little notch, we'll take it. And any outliers above or beyond or significantly above or below the rating category. So if you are at a 50% fund balance and 30% is AAA, you get a notch for that, right? And how much of a notch? That's the art of it. It's not the science of it. That's up to the rating analyst. It's up to the rating committee to make those final determinations. So.
And those notching factors for us is what gets us to AAA. If you go back, you can tell the middle one. So
Yeah.
like the largest taxpayer spread, we don't, when we're on the good side of that, I guess we'll say we don't have one massive property taxpayer in our community. There's a table that you'll see in the official statement document that actually shows our highest taxpayer as a percentage. And you'll notice it's a very small percentage of the whole. And that's what we want, because it shows that we have a diversified portfolio, for lack of a better phrase, in terms of our tax base. But if you have, you know, a Facebook or a large John Deere plant in your community, and that's by far, you know, 10% plus your property taxpayer, that's going to be a negative, because if they leave, then it's a huge hit to your tax base. But if you have that diversified tax base, it's going to be a notch up for us. And then that we have the financial policies, and then we have some of those other factors. We don't have a large university. We don't necessarily get that one, but those other notching factors are what help push us to that AAA rating.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually the institutional presence becomes a notch on the actual scorecard. I work with the city of Lincoln, Nebraska, and they get a notch for having the University of Nebraska there. They get an actual notch on the scorecard upward for it. It says up, and then we're to say down. Like they can take you a whole notch up or a whole notch down in the scorecard with some of the big notching factors. And the other thing I'll say is, you know, remember that a credit rating it's all about risk, right? Moody's is saying, we think that you're low risk, high risk, moderate risk, right? It's all about risk. And so investors, we like to think they read the whole official statement, but in the upper right-hand corner of the cover, it says what your rating is. And so in the Cliff Notes version, that's Moody's putting their name on the line and their reputation on the line to say, we think these guys are AAA, highest credit rating possible.
I don't know. I think if I saw University of Nebraska get a positive notch, I'd give a real careful look at whether those people rated that right. Come on, we can all jump in on Nebraska. Good point. You all showed great restraint on the Iowa State opportunity.
Well, I didn't mean to bring up a controversial topic. So again, as I mentioned, the city of Clive, AA2 in the scorecard, but the final assigned rating is a AAA. So what this means is if anything happens in the scorecard and suddenly the scorecard indicated outcome is a AA3, then we can no longer be a AAA. And generally speaking, when it comes to upgrades or downgrades, Moody's will give you a little bit of time before they'll, you know, do something like that. They'll usually give you like a, hey, if especially if it's one factor driving it, they'll just have the conversation. Okay, because we have 5-year rolling averages for a lot of these. Are we trending that way? Have we hit the bottom? Where are we at in the average? Is it going to get worse? Is it going to get better? They did surprise us with the upgrade. You know, I'm always a positive thinker. So I was like, there's a chance. And then it happened. And so, but you know, I would hope that we'll know before a rating call. It's very unusual to get a rating call where they're like, sorry, you know, this is the year. Usually they'll start to make notes and they'll make it abundantly clear. I've had those reports, I know, where we're fighting. So, and, you know, and when I look at what I'm seeing, I'm reviewing your official statement now. I'll finish it tonight when I get home. And so I'm not seeing anything that makes me think there'll be a change this year. If anything was going to move the needle, the new debt we just did for the public safety building would have moved the needle. That did change some of the metrics, but that's already in the scorecard. Now we're back to 10-year, you know, BQ, you know, I didn't see anything in the future that's going to make anything move in a dramatic way. And with that, just do a quick highlight. So this is right out of the last rating report. The credit strengths, Moody's has stated that the credit strengths of Clive, you benefit from your growing suburb located within the expanding Des Moines metro area. Moody's has a very favorable view of being in the Des Moines metro area. We're very much in a growth area. Through the pandemic, I think Des Moines has fared, the metro area, the MSA, I would say, has fared much better than a lot of our larger metropolitan areas. Very high resident income levels. Like I said, you guys, I think you're 156% of the US median. That's one of the largest numbers in Iowa that I'm aware of. Very healthy financial reserves, significant revenue raising flexibility. So when we look at your 810, your emergency levy, you're not at 810, you're not at your emergency levy, you have unlimited ability to levy for the benefits that you need. And that revenue raising ability, we actually quantify and give them a dollar amount. And in the Moody's presentation that we do. So significant revenue raising flexibility, which reduces the risk of you not being able to pay your bills, right? So credit challenges, the city's tax base is smaller than similarly rated entities. That's what Matt said. We pointed that out. You have a $2 billion tax base compared to the $12 billion they want for the AAA, and high fixed costs relative to rating category. And again, I've argued that when they look at fixed costs, that's your benefits, that's your debt service, that's everything that's fixed, right? And so they lump all of that together. But when they look at fixed costs relative to your revenue, they don't include all the revenues that pay for the debt. So like I said, I haven't won that argument yet, but everybody in Iowa gets that comment because they don't include TIF, and most Iowa cities use TIF to pay for at least a small portion of debt service. So.
And is it still true that it's Iowa City, West Des Moines, and us are the only AAA rated in Iowa still?
That is correct.
Out of the cities, I think Polk
Yes.
County is AAA rated. if I remember.
Polk County, there might be another county.
Yeah. So when you look at the cities, we're a quarter of the size of those other two communities in terms of tax base size and population. I think the last time I looked, we were like the 12th or 13th smallest, or population wise, that's AAA rated in the nation.
Yeah. And I think the smallest, wasn't it an odd, like super wealthy suburb of Chicago or something? I think we got the list last time. We asked for the list of all the AAA rated cities, and we were like looking and, kind of nerding out a little bit on how do we rank, who's big, who's small, like who's this little town of like 5,000 people in Illinois? Oh, okay. Well, that's where all the NBA players live. So, yeah. So overall, I would say, you should feel very good about the hard work that you've done. You're in your budget process. You guys you budget conservatively, and you're consistent, and you do a very good service to your taxpayers in the community. So any other questions?
Any questions? Michael, any questions?
No, sir.
Very good. Thank you, Suzanne.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. Yeah, you're welcome.
We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is correspondence. Matthew.
I have no correspondence for this evening's meeting other than what was in your packet.
Well, thank you very much.
Well done.
We'll start in your end, Pete. What have you got?
Thank you, Your Honor. So this just came shortly before the meeting. It looks like the Iowa House and the governor and Senate have reached an agreement on what they want the tax reform bill to be, moving over time to a flat income tax in Iowa. I think the number I saw right before I hopped in here was that 3.9% was ultimately the floor they hoped to get to. The more important news for where we are in this iterative process is that that proposal does not include the state taking over Lost, which was something we were watching very carefully as a city that stood to feel some very serious financial pain had that process played out differently. Nothing's done. It does sound though like it's moving quickly to the governor's desk. So as we understand more about what's been advanced, we will share that with the council and understand what that might mean for the city's financial position. We'll watch a number of bills as we go toward the second funnel. First funnel was last week. They keep trimming down what's left to be done in the session. Last week we had a very good flood-prone property buyout meeting virtually, and Councilman Mayor Edwards was able to be a part of that meeting as well. Doug and his team and our partners at Stantec were well prepared, and they continue to engage with folks who are looking for that right moment. Still a voluntary program, but I think that was a good reminder for this neighborhood just about what the increasing risk is for flooding in their neighborhood, and what this really good opportunity is for them to continue to come alongside the city and figure out something that makes sense for them, whether that's hardening their property, making it somewhat more flood resilient, or if, depending on where they're at, finding a way that they can get their property and people out of harm's way so that the next flood isn't one that does even more damage than they already have. So we'll continue to update the neighborhood and the council on how those engagements and where we're heading next. Stantec's work on preparing the city for the larger potential brick application continues to move forward. This meeting is part of getting ready for that. The baby goats will be here, we think, very soon. And when they come, we'll break the internet. We're expecting that the births will be sometime in these first 2 weeks of March. And we'll be working closely with the Parks Department to share that really happy news with the entire community. I expect many people coming down, especially if the weather's nice, to visit those cute little kids once they're out.
The fencing has been reinforced on the side where people feed them.
Yeah. We anticipate early in March too, some notification from IDOLS on whether we've got our water quality urban grant program coming forward. You'll remember our submission was to do a number of soil quality restoration projects throughout the city. One of them on a big park, one of them to support the Harbac project, and a third section of those projects dispersed throughout Clive neighborhoods. So we're anticipating very good news on that. We also got good news this week that our partners who helped us prepare the grant at Polk County are planning as if they will be there right alongside us to help us make sure we administer it well. They've had good experience doing that up in Polk City, and we would welcome their help. Finally, congratulations to Mercy Health and Wellness, to Jill Miller, and to Mary Ann Kennedy. They were the honorees last night at the Clive Chambers annual dinner. It was a wonderful celebration with some unusual and a few scary moments. We had a person who had a medical emergency, but fortunately everybody, I can tell you, has come out on the other side of that doing just fine and feeling better today, which is great. But Mercy Health and Wellness was the business of the year. Jill Miller was the Clive Lions, the citizen of the year, and Mary Ann was the chamber champion of the year. So congratulations to all of those folks.
Well deserved.
David.
Nothing to report, Your Honor.
Thank you.
So MPO, we had a review of the SDBG grant requests. There were 16 applications with a total of 28 million in requests. They're anticipating about 13 million in allocation. If you recall, our request was for the I-35/80 interchange reconstruction project, which was for 3.1 million. It was by far the highest dollar amount of all the requests. We did score an 85 on the scoring matrix, which wasn't bad, but it was 5th out of the 16 projects. And so I was a little disillusioned by that. I looked into the scoring matrix a little closer, asked some questions about that. And basically, if you're considered a system capacity project, you automatically get allocated 15 points. If you're a major reconstruction, you get 45 points just as a base, and then system optimization 30 points. So system capacity is the lowest base points, and that's what our interchange was classified as. So it's all about how you're classified on the front end of the project. And when I inquired about that, it's like, do the folks who submit these applications know how that's being classified? The answer was no. They probably have no idea. And basically what it came out to was, I think there's a checkbox on the application. If you're doing any widening of lanes, you're automatically classified as system capacity. So you get 3 times less the amount of base points. So, so we'll see what happens. I think Jeff was at the technical thing today.
Virtual today.
Oh, was it virtual? Okay. So hopefully that went well, and that's where the subcommittee was going to meet and go over each of the projects and determine which ones got the allocation. So hopefully that went well. But so we should find out about that soon.
Scheduling a meeting in March.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's for the Hickman interchange in particular. So both the interstate and Hickman through that interchange area would have additional lanes. So it is a capacity enhancement. The other one to put on the council's radar, just to know that the city of Waukee submitted for this year as kind of the first phase as a joint application, is Alice's Road. Alice's Road is also a system capacity enhancement because we have a 2-lane rural cross-section road that's going to go to a 5-lane road at some point in the future. So those are ones that are tougher to score because it's definitely weighted towards the existing system capacity reconstructions now, where there may be some advantages to us in the future. And the city's received MPO funding in the past on these, is like when we did the maintenance on University Avenue, when we did the asphalt overlay, the same for 86th Street. We got MPO funding for those more maintenance related projects, and we'll have at some point in the future, west of the interstate, University Avenue, that we'll be looking at doing the asphalt overlay. So we'll have some of those kind of reconstruction maintenance projects coming, but the ones in our radar right now are system capacity additions to lanes. And so
They might get scored a little lower.
might get scored a little lower, but hopefully we might still get some funding. So
Yep, do his magic. That's all I have.
Thanks, Ted. Michael, we've circulated information about DART and their request for us to weigh in on their funding options. Do you want to give us some information about that?
Yeah, I know that a letter came out to city managers and the mayors here recently, and I've been contacted by a couple of the mayors. You know, they're at the state legislature asking for additional hotel tax money from them, allowing, you know, mass transit to claim some of that. And I can't remember exactly how much that is, Matt or John, but they're asking for all the cities to support this legislation. Some of the pushback with some of the cities, I kind of sit in that camp a little bit, is that, you know, the cities would sure like that to be freed up for them to decide what they do with the money, you know, if they were going to allow that. I don't know if you would get the additional dollars if it was, you know, with the legislators that they are. If you just said it's for the cities, I'm not sure you'd get it, but it would help fund the operations of DART. And actually, in that, you'll have to help me on this one, the exact numbers, but it would lower the property tax, right, of most of the cities, if not all the cities.
About 10.6 million, I believe.
Where's the funding coming from?
million.
it's a 5%. That's an increase of 5% to the hotel motel tax.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, so right now it's at 7%. It would be 5% on top of that. What the proposal is the entire 5%. And again, DART would have to get this voted upon in the metro area, would have to be approved. The entire 5% would go towards an offset of property tax. So it wouldn't be adding to, it would be replacing. And this was part of the strategy with that you recall, I think Elizabeth was here last year, in terms of the shift to Des Moines, in terms of additional cost, and their property tax impact was going up and ours is slowly going down. And a number of other communities, I think West Des Moines and Des Moines are the only two that were going up, Des Moines substantially. But part of the discussion from the city of Des Moines is we're okay with this in the short term, but there needs to be some commitment on behalf of all of DART to find a replacement for property tax. It's not going to replace property tax in its entirety in DART's budget, but it'll basically diversify the revenue sources to have both hotel motel and property tax. But then it would have to, the hotel motel portion would have to just go completely to offset. So it would keep Des Moines below the caps that are set in legislation, and all of us below the 90-cent cap, 95-cent cap, I think. And so that is the proposal that they've been, that DART's been working on over the last couple of years. Is that a fair assessment, Councilmember McCoy?
Yeah, better explained than I was explaining it. Some are worried that this is Des Moines' way of kind of backdooring things, right? Of getting their obligation, which I think we all agree should be the majority of the obligation due to ridership and such, to be spread out further around the community. But it's a decision that John and I talked earlier, it's really a council decision on how to move forward. That I know of, the legislators have not voted on this, correct?
Correct.
When I left town, they hadn't voted. Yeah.
Correct.
So it's still a crapshoot if they even get the ability to do this. There is movement, though.
It came close last session. It went through the House and was in the governor's package, but it went through the Senate, excuse me, but didn't make it to the
Still
House.
the House, yeah.
So need some consensus. They want to know by the 28th whether or not we would be supportive of that. So,
5% property tax relief for our residents.
right, it'd be a local option on the
On the
Hotel, yeah,
motel.
yeah, hotel
So it'd be the
motel.
Well,
visitors
5% would go,
going
and
up
then whatever that
5%.
amount.
So essentially, the policy argument is locally, our folks don't pay hotel motel
Right,
fee
right.
or tax.
Out of
They're gonna
towners,
pay
yeah.
all of the property tax.
Right.
And also those hotels are gonna pay the property tax. So it's one of those where, yes, they're gonna see a higher hotel motel tax going from 7 to 12%. But at the same point, their property tax liability will go down if the DART levy goes down.
Right.
And so for, dollar for dollar, it's a dollar for dollar replacement, but you have 100% being paid locally, whereas the hotel motel tax isn't paid 100% locally. I don't know what the exact percentage is, but it's probably 50, at least 50-50. So folks coming in are actually paying for DART just as much as the local residents are.
And then that less reliance on any single source. local
Yeah, I'd like
Diversification of the revenues,
Yeah,
yep.
it's certainly
Yep.
important. So
But it also is a lot more elastic revenue too. It's just another thing to keep in mind is,
Sure.
yes, it's diversifying. Property tax is the most stable, essentially the most stable revenue source
Sure.
in the bucket that we have here in Iowa. And hotel motel, as we saw with the pandemic, is one of the more elastic.
But that's a DART challenge that they
Right.
have to deal with from a budgeting perspective.
Correct.
So if they had a decent board, they might be able to manage.
Hey, that board member of yours has lowered your rate the last couple of years. It's an amazing feat by one person. And you guys are getting heavy on my shoulders.
So what's
But
the consent?
that's right though, Ted, and you're right. It's their problem to put their eggs in that basket. Of course, the hotel motel, and there's talk about CVB not happy and working behind the scenes, and the hotels calling foul, but the alternative is bleak as well.
And by comparison, I think they've shown that even that increase, that our hotel motel rate is still less than a lot of places where you travel.
Correct.
I think it makes sense.
I do too.
Okay, sounds like we've got consensus around the table.
All right.
Very good. Counselor,
Nothing, Your Honor.
Matt?
Just a few things tonight. I've been invited to participate in Bravo Greater Des Moines, working on their future visioning. They're doing some focus groups with some city officials, and so I'll be participating in that here in the next week. Wanted to mention, Pete talked about the WQI grant. As I mentioned last week, Rachel Conrad will be leaving us and actually going to Polk County, taking a nice jump for her in terms of her role as an assistant Polk County engineer over water resources. And interestingly enough, if we get that WQI grant, she will be on that side of it in terms of working. So we've told Rachel that no matter that you're moving on to a great opportunity, you're still going to be hooked into Clive in terms of work that we're doing. I'm happy for her. Tough loss for us. That's a tough position to replace, and we'll be working on some interim strategies here. That is definitely a tough role in this job market to replace. It was difficult when we were able to find Rachel a number of years ago, and the market's even tighter now. So we'll be looking at some interim steps just to keep up with the many things that we're doing in that arena that Rachel was overseeing and helping direct, and then being aggressive on a recruitment for her replacement. So just wanted to make the council aware of that. Also, too, I know it's been brought up in conversation here. We're having some discussions with Glacier Properties on the use of their ATV vehicles in city streets. We are reviewing the state code with them and having some dialogue. I believe the owner Glacier Properties wants to have some engagement with the council on that. There was some discussions of how that was created a number of years ago in terms of allowing that to happen. I've asked the police chief to review that with them, and I think we're hoping to find maybe an agreement of a transition plan for them to get away from using those vehicles on city streets. And so I think there's definitely a desire for Craig Ellingson to have some dialogue with the council. So we'll coordinate that a little bit on our end. But we, from the staff level, feel it's time for us to make sure that folks are in compliance and get that done. But just wanted to make you aware of that. Again, we'll have some further follow-up on that in the future here. And then lastly, kind of in that neighborhood, the Harbac Center. So with the public safety folks moving to the new building, we've kind of rebranded the former Diamond Public Safety Facility to the Harbac Center as a temporary name for now. Richard and his team and Dennis on the tech side have been doing a lot of work to get the facility ready to go for programming here in the next month or so. So hopefully later in March here, we'd like to find a date to maybe have the council come over and do a little tour, and you wouldn't probably recognize some of the areas. We have some library shelving that was going up this week that we were able to get at a very, very good deal from another library that had access. And so starting to put together a branch library, and we already have the community room space with the old training room and then the apparatus space. So a lot of good things happening, a lot of exciting ideas and programming ideas that are being generated among staff and as well as other entities. We actually have a couple groups that are already using the space that we've worked with quite a bit in the past. So excited to kind of show that off to the council and things that'll be happening for the next 18 months here as part of that kind of experimental programming phase, as we've talked about. And at a staff level, talked quite a bit today about the data collection that we want to do and the surveying to really use this time to learn a lot about what makes sense for the neighborhood and the broader community, and then get to that, longer term decision of what we do with the facility going forward. So excited about that. Should be some fun things this spring to do there in the Harbac Center and Lanand Park. So excited about that, but that's all I have, Your Honor, unless there's any questions.
Any questions for Matt? I did want to thank Councilmember Klein and Councilmember McCoy for making special effort to connect with us tonight. It was very important that we have a quorum and that we have the 4 votes needed to pass the tax rate. So we appreciate that. Any final words from you, Councilmember McCoy?
None for me. Thank you, Mayor.
Anything else for the good of the order this evening? Seeing nothing, we'll adjourn at 7:35.